So David, so as founding members of RED, we wanted to start by asking you why you participated in the founding of the Campus Antifascist Network,
right,
and what you see as its major contributions to date.
Well, the main reason we put it together was that during the course of the presidential campaign, we were just astounded not only by what Trump was saying, but the amount of support he was getting. Mm-hmm. And it was very clear that he was not going to hold back at all, and the fact that he was saying things that were blatantly outrageous and racist and fascistic, and getting people saying yes. Mm-hmm. That was the beginning of a series of conversations that we had. And largely it was a group that was already in contact around BDS and about Palestinian issues. So there was a very clear line of connection between the two groups. And so we basically were just having conversations and thinking it would be important to have a network of people that would be able to respond to things as they came out. And then Charlottesville happened. And that just, we didn't even have a website at that point within 3 days. We just wanted to have something up so that people that were interested in the issue could immediately have a set of resources. And I think at that point our main contribution was just to get information out and to share information from different campuses, you know, what kinds of things were going on, what kinds of struggles were being anticipated, what kinds of obstacles were being put up almost instantaneously by campus administrators, how the press was treating the thing. We also put up very quickly a course syllabus, you know, what kinds of teaching materials could be out there. So our immediate interest was in defense and information. And since then, you know, we've had many chapters growing nationally. We have a chapter in Berlin, we have one in the UK. We would like to get something set up here. Each different national context has a different set of challenges in terms of who to involve and how to involve them. But the main thing now is just to have this network of people involved and ready to act. And we've had successes. We've had, you know, pushing back against Richard Spencer and his appearance in Florida. We've had a number of actions in Berkeley, for example, that helped to basically diffuse the whole Milos, the second visit that Milos was going to have. And most importantly, we've gotten to college administrators, so even though they're not well educated at all, at least they know that there's some organized opposition and that there is not a number of miscellaneous individuals, you know, writing them emails, but there's an organization that is standing by people that are coming under attack, especially from Turning Points USA, which is probably, you know, our most common enemy in terms of the people that are coming onto campus and disrupting things.
We were curious as well because in the Radical Education Department, we've been doing a lot of work on coalition building.
Yeah.
And we've found that at times for our particular political orientation, it's helpful to have a radical core group that agrees on certain fundamentals.
Exactly.
And that at times working with broader umbrella organizations in which others come in who might not share that platform makes it more difficult. And so we'd be curious to hear from you regarding the relationship basically between larger umbrella coalitions that might bring in larger numbers but cause certain complications versus more focused groups in which there'd be a stronger political coalescence. What's your experience of canon?
Yeah, I mean, that's really why we were very upfront about calling it Campus Antifascist Network, because that label, and we'll talk about that later on this evening, that label scares so many people away. You know, so we were very absolute that we were claiming that term. We were going to animate it according to a platform that was built around self-defense, it was built around education, it was built around trying to really, and this is very important, work with students, you know, different levels of faculty and staff, most importantly with students who are often on the front lines and the most vulnerable. So we didn't want to back away from that label, and that to some degree has made it very clear what we're about. So in terms of a larger umbrella group, we came up with a mission statement that very clearly declares what we stand by, what the core values are, and people that would not be ready to sign on to that aren't signing on. So we've not been troubled by having broader, other groups coming and saying, well, would you modify your stance so we could join? We really haven't had any problem with that because we've been very, very clear in our declaration of intent.
Right. I think just to follow up on that quickly, one of our concerns is when you're working in leftist organizing, how broad you understand the left and how broad you want to make that platform. Right. And that what has been important for our coalition building is a minimal consensus which is anti-capitalist, hence anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, etc., against racial hierarchies and whatnot. And that there are large swaths of the left that identify as left but aren't anti-capitalist.
Right.
And for our mode of organizing, it's been important to make that dividing line very apparent. And I wonder, in your experience with CAN, how that plays itself out, or has it played itself out?
Again, we really haven't had much of a difficulty with that issue. The closest equivalent would be, we were just talking about the Parti des Indigènes here in Paris, and they very much are like you. They're very clearly decolonial, and that has alienated a lot of people on the left, and they're fine with that. I mean, they're saying, this is our position. You don't have to sign on to everything, but this is what we're doing, and we're not going to bend our discourse to fit your needs. We're not anti-collaborative, but not if it's going to take us off message. And our position is very similar. We have a stake in that position in the political spectrum, and it's important to maintain that. We're not purists, but we're absolute in the sense that it is anti-fascist. And the issue that often comes up is, well, what do you call fascism? And we have a very clear understanding of what that is, and it's really a lot. We owe a lot to Shane Burley and to Mark Bray in terms of really distilling what the operative notion of fascism is today, which is a supremacist ideology that mobilizes the state and business interests and corporate interests and the media, and is full-fledged to maintain the notion that some groups are, one group is superior to others and the other ones have to line up, or else they will be intimidated, threatened, and attacked, and that's something we stand against.
The next thing I wanted to ask you about was how you see universities operating as a site of political struggle right now. And I think one of the kind of follow-ups to that question is we have these kind of more mediatized, spectacular instances of people, fascists coming to campuses with their own media apparatus, and the media ready to, particularly to frame any opposition to that as violent, etc. But then we also have universities that, essentially aspects of them that promote incredibly destructive policies much more quietly. And that don't have this kind of, including, just with what institutions within them do, which the faculties within them do. And so this question of thinking of the university as a site of struggle, how do you think about that, both, in terms of these more visible kinds of instances that have happened since Trump began his campaign, and these more systemic issues?
Right, that's a great question, because I'm sure you've read Shane Burley's article basically declaring that Antifa has won. I mean, when you have Richard Spencer saying, well, it's no fun anymore, and Milos is getting, hounded by being at Starbucks. I mean, but the real concern that we have is that they're regrouping, and they're being much more subtle. They're learning, they already were trying to, wear khakis and polo shirts and all that, mask that. But then, physically they were out there beating people. So now they've really gone underground. I think they're regrouping, and I think that's exactly the question we need to raise, is how they're regrouping, the different ways that they're mobilizing more subtle tactics. Turning Point USA is a very good example, because they will come and set up these tables, as you know, saying, capitalism is good and wealth is fine. I mean, all these things that seem fairly innocuous, and they're pairing up with campus Republicans. But what's interesting is that once they get rolling and you see what they're up to, then it starts to sort of literally be a turning point, in the sense that, for example, at Stanford, we have a college Republican club, and they've split. I mean, when one of them decided to bring Robert Spencer to campus, the other, I guess, vice president or co-president said, no, this is not what we think of as being conservatives on campus, and you're taking it in a very different direction. That faction is won out for the moment, but that they've been very publicly embarrassed by these leaked emails, which we can talk about later on. So our concern is that we need to be vigilant. We need to keep on seeing how these things are operating, and understand that the game is morphing to some degree.
I think if I could follow up on that, I think the question is also about the differences between visible and invisible modes of fascism, meaning that, of course, when these prominent figures are invited to campus and given a university megaphone for their views, then it can be an identifiable flashpoint in anti-fascist struggles. But then what about the more insidious, invisible forms that are operative within what's referred to as the military-industrial academic complex, right? So that you have these enormous, military operations that are basically outsourced to universities. You have professors who are doing military research, and the ways in which basically the university is so bound up within this larger imperial apparatus. How do you think that we can take that into account in anti-fascist struggles, or do you think that that should be one of the focal points? And if so, what might be strategies for dealing with that? Because it's one thing to shut down a speaker. It's another thing to get a university, for instance, to stop working for the State Department, or to, do projects that would be in line with the imperial imperatives of the current U.S. administration.
Well, let me answer that in two ways. I mean, one is a more general response, which is that when Charlie Kirk makes it clear that he is funding student government elections, in other words, I have no problem with campus Republicans running for office and having the same pool of resources as anybody else. But when you start funneling in money from Peter Thiel or whoever it is, then that's something that has to be called out and contained. In terms of your second question, this is something that has been going on since I remember back in Berkeley when I think his name was Charles Schwartz. He was talking about the physics department and how the linear accelerator at Stanford and how the cyclotron at Berkeley were complicitous with every physics department was building one way or another. So I think those kinds of things have to be called out and to be made visible. And the hardest thing, of course, as you know, in these struggles is information. Is to find out exactly what is being operationalized in what kinds of covert ways. So that's something that it varies from campus to campus. Sometimes you have robust faculty governance instruments that can actually call for that information. Sometimes you don't. But the most important thing to do would be to be on those campuses and mobilize students and faculty to get that information. If the information is not forthcoming, figure out why that is, and embarrass the administration. But that's clearly one of the major ways in which universities are helping these efforts in terms of the military.
Because you can also see it in the case of, for instance, when there are members of the U.S. government who are war criminals who are then given university positions, which happens all the time. So then you don't just have one individual talk, but you have an endowed chair that's given to someone or whatnot. And it would be interesting if these larger systemic elements of the university's complicity with American imperialism then also became part of that struggle. Is that something that CAN is interested in, or is on the horizon? How do you see this?
Not at this point. But it's certainly well within the bounds of what we would do. For example, at Stanford, we have the Hoover Institution, and we have exactly what you're talking about. You know that there are particular agencies within the Defense Department, like DARPA, that is, DARPA, right? They for example, innocuously set up this program at Stanford where let's do this. It's almost like a high school science fair. Let's think about how you could have a self-driving car. I mean, this is way back when. It started at Carnegie Mellon, it was brought to Stanford, and it was taking a Toyota through the Sahara, whatever. And this then got right into DARPA with drones and all sorts of unmanned military vehicles. The other thing that DARPA did, which had to do not with hardware, but with human resources was the terrorist futures. Do you know about this plot?
No.
I mean, this is something that Paul Wolfowitz, when he was Assistant Secretary of Defense, was into. It was basically it was sort of a rational choice model of the stock market, saying, let's pretend there's going to be a terrorist attack. Let's harness all these hedge funders and investors to see when the next attack might be, and then bet on it. And this was leaked, and Wolfowitz famously said, well, DARPA is very imaginative. Maybe it got too imaginative. And they shut it down because it was very obvious that if you started using this as a model, if you were smart, you would start planning terrorist attacks that would then pay off because you knew. So it's this kind of mentality. This is something that I think is broader than the question you had, but something we should attend to is the way of militarizing intelligence. In other words, well, most conspicuously, that peace studies is bogus. I mean, the whole notion that war is necessary. I mean, this is an important option to always have out there, but not, negotiation, not peace, etc. This is the way that students are automatically channeled into a mindset and imaginatively shut down. So this is another thing that I think the universities should think about. There's one peace studies or a couple of programs in the United States, but think of that. We have all these things that support ROTC or whatever, but we don't have this notion that there are other options in the world dealing with struggle, with dealing with liberation, with dealing with freedom.
Yeah.
So that's part of a larger conversation. But that's it's no wonder that the right is targeting universities because you have young people, which is just a fertile ground for all sorts of things. And it's a place where there's still a modicum of free speech and academic freedom. So that's dangerous. That's very, very dangerous. So you want to discredit the left, you want to discredit dissent, you want to have people saying that conversely, their free speech is being denied when you can't bring a fascist onto campus. So it's those kinds of contradictions, institutional contradictions, that I think are really important to get out.
What would you like to see CAN do in the future? And
Yeah.
how do you think that groups like RED
Yeah.
could contribute to those?
And this is probably the hardest thing to do. One of the first things that we wanted to do was to have a large national event. And that's very hard to pull together logistically and financially and everything else like that. But it's just, it's easy to do, online networking. It's really hard to get face-to-face like we're doing right now. That would be our highest aspiration, is just to get a sense of who's doing what and really meet at least once a year with a core group of people. And then to really decide, because it's very hard, there are so many different kinds of institutions, public, private, 2-year, 4-year, ones with graduate programs, and each have their own challenges. And so it's very hard to think of a one-size-fits-all program. And this is why our initial programming has been so basic, just basic knowledge, basic defense, and things like that. And so it would be important for different institutions at in different tiers to share information. What would it look like in a 2-year college? What would it look like in a 4-year? Are there differences East Coast, West Coast, South? I mean, those things really matter. I mean, Amanda Gailey in Nebraska has been completely plummeted by the right, because before she was involved in anti-fascist work, she was instrumental in gun control. And so the state legislature had primed her as a target. So it's exactly that kind of militarization, weapons. It's that kind of, they're very well organized. So we have to in a commensurate fashion, understand how we can organize. So that would be our highest aspirations, to understand in as fine-tuned a way what the different variants are of the struggle at different locations without making it too atomized, right? To have, again, the core set of initial aims and then modified accordingly. Hopefully, what they always say is our most highest aspiration is for us to become unnecessary. We wouldn't need to do it.
The struggle would be more.
Yeah, and or to morph into something else. But right now, who knows? You know, there's no sign of Trump slowing down. There's no sign of his support, you know, lessening. I mean, it always astounds me when they say, you know, well, he only has 36%. To me, 36% is an astronomically high percentage to have in support. And he's got his way. I mean, and his way is multiple. Confusion, obfuscation, and is wearing us all down. So the best way to reply and to respond is through solidarity.
And how do you see other groups potentially contributing to
Yeah.
or working in ways that would further a kind of broader anti-fascist struggle?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it would be really important to understand different groups' capacities and skills. So a lot of anti-fascist work is done, as you know, on the internet. I mean, this capacity I'm completely bereft of, but younger people are very, very, very in tune with how to fight back against that and develop good strategies for communications, privacy and security and things like that. So staying a step ahead of the game is really important. So you can imagine and again, a lot of people can't come out visibly and identifiably doing so, but you can certainly do work anonymously and contribute as you can. So it would be basically, again, having a landmark out that there is come to us. If we can't answer the question, we can give you the number of somebody else who can help, and growing that. So we're a clearinghouse in a sense. That would be another function that we would take on.
And how do you see the role of an organization based in universities or based in institutions of higher education as potentially linking to being a resource for anti-fascist struggles that are taking place in other kinds of social domains, like around immigration, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you see potential for kind of forms of solidarity, across?
Of course, absolutely. That's a great observation. I mean, I'm just thinking about the work we do in BDS and the fact that we're reaching out to unions. I mean, this is really important, this kind of collaboration. And I've done a lot of work with immigration rights workers, and that's a very clear manifestation of fascism in that. I mean, you think about the lost children and all this. It's just, and the fact that the Justice Department is now doing things that, having talked to a couple of immigration lawyers, they would never have acted on so much of this like a year ago, and now they're being not only given the green light, but the incentive to do these. They're just pushing the envelope as far as they can go, and it seems like they can go fairly far. And so, coupling legal aid with educating students on campus, a lot of them are, not tremendous numbers of them, but a lot of them are either undocumented or have family members that are. I mean, this is really a way to educate people at the university and also to work with agencies outside the university collaboratively. So yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, well, thank you for these great questions. You made me think in really important ways.
Well, hopefully we can work together in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.